I'll break his toy kung fu. 2 rounds. Maybe one if he's stupid enough to trade with me. The words traveled through the martial arts community in Los Angeles the way fire travels through dry brush, fast, hot, impossible to contain once ignited. From the Muay Thai camp on Sunset to the boxing gyms downtown. From the boxing gyms to the karate dojos in the valley. From the dojos to the JKD training halls, the Kali schools, the silent groups, the loose network of cross-training practitioners who operated in the spaces between traditional martial arts and who recognized, when the words arrived, that the words were not just an insult. They were an invitation. Toy Kung Fu. Toy. The word toy is specific. It was chosen, consciously or unconsciously, to do maximum damage. Not fake, which implies deception. Not weak, which implies insufficient force. Toy. A thing for children. A thing that mimics the real thing without being the real thing. A plastic sword. A cap gun. Something you play with until you encounter the actual version, at which point the toy breaks and the game is over. The man who said it had earned the right to his confidence, if not his contempt. 80 fights in Thailand. 72 wins. A record built not in controlled point sparring tournaments or semi-contact kickboxing matches but in the rings of Bangkok and Chiang Mai, where Muay Thai is not a martial art but a national industry, where children begin fighting competitively before they're teenagers, where the training is brutal and the competition is relentless and the fighters who survive to their late 20s have been tested in ways that fighters from other traditions can barely imagine. He'd come to America 2 years ago. He hadn't lost since arriving. 14 fights. 14 wins. Most by stoppage. Most in round 2. His words reached the man they were aimed at through the predictable chain of martial arts gossip, someone who trained at both gyms, someone who knew someone, the telephone game of the training hall. By the time the words arrived, the tone had been stripped away, the context had been flattened, and only the content remained. Toy Kung Fu. 2 rounds. The man they were aimed at didn't say much in response. He rarely did. He was not a talker. He was a quiet, compact, unimpressive-looking Filipino-American who trained out of Dan Inosanto's academy and who carried in his body a lineage that stretched back through Dan to a man who had been dead for several years but whose principles were very much alive in the way that a fire is alive, consuming fuel and producing heat and spreading to everything it touches. Dan Inosanto carried the 30-second lesson into everything he taught. The trust. The honesty. The principle that training without truth is theater and that a martial artist who has never felt real speed will build defenses against imaginary speed and then wonder why they fail when the real thing arrives. He passed this to his students the way Bruce passed it to him, not through lectures but through contact. Through the physical transmission of knowledge that can only be communicated from one body to another at speed, under pressure, with genuine consequence. And one of those students, this quiet man with fast hands and a strange rhythm, carried that inheritance into a small boxing ring in Los Angeles on a night when everything Bruce Lee had built was about to be tested. Not by Bruce. By his ghost. 2 generations removed from the source. Teacher to student to student. The question was whether the signal could survive 2 transmissions without degrading into noise. The man across the ring had never lost on American soil. And he thought he was fighting kung fu. This was the era of the challenge match. Late 1970s, early 1980s. The underground circuit. Before the UFC gave cross-style fighting a brand name and a pay-per-view platform. Before mixed martial arts existed as a category. Before any of the infrastructure that would eventually normalize the idea that fighters from different systems could test their arts against each other under controlled conditions. In this era, the testing happened in the dark. In gyms after hours. In boxing rings rented for the night. In venues that existed on the border between legal and not quite legal, where the rules were minimal and the records were non-existent and the only documentation was the memory of the 50 or 80 or 100 people who showed up to watch. No television cameras. No official judges. No sanctioning bodies. A referee whose job was less to enforce rules than to prevent deaths. A crowd of martial artists who came to answer, or to watch someone else answer, the only question that mattered: does your style actually work? The question was raw. Impolite. Fundamental. Every martial arts school in every city in every country claimed effectiveness. Every system had its masters and its lineage and its demonstrations of devastating technique performed against compliant partners in controlled conditions. But compliance and control are the enemies of truth, and the challenge match era was built on a single uncomfortable premise: the only way to know if a technique works is to use it against someone who is genuinely trying to stop it from working. Not a training partner. Not a student. An opponent. From a different system. With different tools. Playing a different game. The Muay Thai camp issued the challenge. Or the JKD camp accepted an open challenge. Or the challenge emerged organically from the collision of two groups of martial artists who trained in the same city and whose paths crossed often enough that the question, who would win, became too loud to ignore. The exact mechanism doesn't matter. What matters is the result: a date, a venue, a set of minimal rules, and two men who agreed to stand in a 14-foot ring and find out whose art was real. The Thai fighter had a pattern. Every fighter has a pattern, and the Thai's was more reliable than most. It had been tested in 80 fights across 2 countries over 15 years, and it had failed only 8 times, all early, all against elite Thai competition, all in the phase of his career when the pattern was still being refined. The refined pattern was simple, and simplicity was its strength. Round 1, probe. Measure the opponent. Throw teep kicks to establish range. Throw leg kicks to reduce mobility. Read the opponent's timing, habits, tendencies. Don't commit. Don't chase. Let the opponent come to you, and when he comes, note how he comes, his angles, his speed, his rhythm. Catalog everything. Round 2, finish. Take everything you cataloged in round 1 and use it. Hunt the clinch. Throw elbows. End it. The elbows were the period at the end of every sentence the Thai fighter wrote. Short, sharp, delivered from the clinch range where most fighters are ineffective, targeting the temple, the jaw, the orbital bone. The elbow is Muay Thai's secret weapon, too short for most fighters to see coming, too sharp for most guards to absorb, too devastating for most bodies to withstand. The Thai fighter's elbows had ended dozens of careers. They were, in the language of combat, inevitable. But there was a word for what happens when a predictable pattern meets a system designed to exploit predictable patterns. Bruce Lee had a word for it. He wrote it in his notebooks. He built his entire martial art around it. He called it interception. The Thai fighter. Let me build him for you properly, because he deserves it. This is not a villain. This is not a cartoon antagonist who exists only to lose. This is a man who has devoted his life to the most physically demanding combat sport on earth and who has, by any honest measure, mastered it. Late 20s. 5'10". 165 pounds. The Muay Thai physique is distinctive and unmistakable: lean, cut, with the long arms and broad shoulders that clinch fighting develops and the narrow waist and defined obliques that thousands of hours of kicking produce. His body is not built for aesthetics. It's built for function. Each muscle exists because the training demanded it, shaped by the specific forces that Muay Thai exerts on the human frame. The shoulders are wide because the clinch requires it. The forearms are dense because the blocks require it. The calves are thick because the kicks require it. The core is visible and solid because everything requires it: every kick, every knee, every elbow starts in the core and radiates outward. His shins. I need to describe his shins because they are the physical evidence of what this man has invested in his art. Muay Thai shin conditioning is one of the most painful and most effective training processes in combat sports. The fighter kicks hard objects, heavy bags, banana trees, pads held by trainers, thousands of times, over years, until the bone itself responds. Microfractures form, heal, and rebuild with increased density. The nerve endings in the skin over the shin gradually desensitize. The result, after years of conditioning, shins that are functionally weapons. Dense enough to crack ribs through a guard. Desensitized enough that the fighter feels pressure but not pain. His shins carry visible conditioning scars, small white lines on the front of each leg where the bone has been broken down and rebuilt, the geological process of sedimentation performed on a human skeleton. His record in context, 80 fights in Thailand, is not a statistic. It's an autobiography. Thai fighters begin competing as children. By the time they reach their late 20s, they have been in more real fights with real stakes, real consequences, real blood, than most Western martial artists will experience in a lifetime of training. His 72 wins represent not just skill but survival. His 8 losses, all early, represent the tuition he paid to the sport before the sport accepted him as one of its own. He is, by any objective standard, a legitimate and dangerous fighter. His contempt for Kung Fu is not ignorance. It's experience. He has seen Kung Fu demonstrations. He has watched the movies. He has seen men in flowing costumes perform elaborate techniques that look beautiful and that would, in his professional assessment, last approximately 4 seconds against a trained Thai boxer. His assessment is, in the broad strokes, correct. In the era before cross-training, most traditional martial artists were not competitive against trained Muay Thai fighters. The styles hadn't been pressure tested. The techniques hadn't been verified under combat conditions. The gap between demonstration and application was wide, and the Thai fighter had spent his career on the application side of that gap, watching demonstration-trained fighters crumble when the reality of 8 limbs arrived. His mistake, his only mistake, and the one that would cost him, was assuming that Jeet Kune Do was Kung Fu. That the system built by Bruce Lee, a system specifically designed to eliminate everything that didn't work under real conditions, was the same as the traditional systems it had departed from. The Thai fighter saw a Chinese name and a Chinese lineage and filed the information under Kung Fu and moved on. It was a reasonable assumption. It was the wrong assumption. And it would be proven wrong in round 2. The JKD fighter. Let me build him too, because the contrast is the engine of this story, and the contrast only works if both men are fully rendered. Filipino-American. Late 20s, early 30s. 5'6". 155 pounds. Compact. Powerful in the way that short men with broad shoulders and thick wrists are powerful, the force concentrated into a smaller frame, the leverage shorter but the density higher. In a room full of martial artists, in a room full of fighters, you would look past this man. Your eyes would slide over him the way they slide over anyone who doesn't match the visual template your brain has filed under dangerous. He's too short. Too stocky. No dramatic musculature, no visible abdominal definition, no veins mapping the surface of his arms like rivers on a topographic display. He looks like a guy who works at a warehouse. He looks like someone's uncle. His lineage, trained directly under Dan Inosanto, who trained directly under Bruce Lee. 2 generations from the source. He never met Bruce. He carries Bruce's principles the way a grandchild carries a grandparent's genetics, present in the deep structure, invisible on the surface. Emerging only under specific conditions that call them forth. His training is layered. JKD at the core: interception, broken rhythm, economy of motion, adaptability, the straight lead. These principles were transmitted from Bruce to Dan through hundreds of hours of training, including the 30 seconds, and from Dan to this fighter through hundreds more. The principles don't degrade in transmission because they're not techniques. They're concepts. A technique can be copied incorrectly. A concept, once understood, is understood. And this fighter understands. Filipino martial arts layered on top of the JKD core. Kali. Eskrima. The stick and knife fighting arts of the Philippines, inherited from Dan Inosanto, who inherited them from his own Filipino teachers. The contribution of Kali to this fighter's skill set is specific and devastating: hand speed. When you train with sticks, fast sticks, double sticks, weapons moving at speeds that require the hands to track and intercept threats arriving from every conceivable angle simultaneously, your empty hand speed develops beyond what empty hand training alone can produce. The neural pathways between the brain and the hands become superhighways. The hands learn to operate at speeds that the conscious mind can't direct, operating instead on trained reflex, on the deep pattern recognition that develops when you've caught 10,000 sticks coming at your head and have learned to respond before the conscious mind finishes identifying the threat. This fighter's hand speed, the product of years of Cali training under Inosanto, is the attribute that boxers who've sparred with him describe with a single word: unfair. Boxing fundamentals underneath everything: footwork, head movement, combination punching. The Western boxing base gives the fighter something that many traditional martial artists lack: the ability to move his head off the center line while maintaining his own offensive capability. Head movement is boxing's gift to combat. The ability to not be where the punch is aimed while simultaneously being where your punch needs to launch from. It's simple in concept and extraordinarily difficult in execution, and this fighter has drilled it until it's automatic. His timing is the weapon nobody sees until it's too late. Broken rhythm. Bruce Lee's adaptation of fencing theory, the principle that an attack delivered between the beats of the opponent's expected rhythm is more effective than a faster attack delivered on the beat. This fighter has internalized broken rhythm to the point where it's not a technique he applies but a fundamental quality of how he moves. He never attacks when you expect him to. Never. The attacks arrive between the moments when your brain is predicting the next stimulus. The effect, for opponents who fight on a steady, predictable rhythm, which is most opponents, because most combat sports train rhythm into fighters the way music schools train rhythm into musicians, the effect is the sensation that the attacks come from outside time. From a dimension where the clock runs differently. Where the beats fall in the wrong places. I've spent months trying to understand what happens when a trained Thai boxer faces someone who operates on broken rhythm, and the closest analogy I've found is musical. Muay Thai is 4/4 time. Steady, powerful, relentless. Kick, knee, elbow, clinch, boom, 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 boom. The rhythm is the weapon as much as the techniques themselves, because the rhythm creates a pressure that most opponents can't sustain. They tire against it. They wilt. They break. JKD broken rhythm is jazz. Syncopated. The accents fall where the listener doesn't expect them. The melody is there but it's displaced, shifted off the grid, arriving a half beat early or a quarter beat late in ways that the 4/4 listener cannot predict. And when you've spent your entire career fighting in 4/4 time, and suddenly the man across from you is playing in 7/8, your internal metronome breaks. You can't find the beat. You can't predict the next accent. You can't time your defense because your defense is calibrated to a rhythm that no longer exists. The venue. A small boxing gym in a rough part of Los Angeles. Not a sanctioned event, the sanctioning bodies don't know about this and wouldn't approve if they did. A 14-foot ring, smaller than the standard 20-foot ring, which matters enormously. A smaller ring compresses the fighting space. It reduces the room available for movement, for angular exits, for the kind of footwork that allows a smaller fighter to control distance against a larger one. A smaller ring favors the bigger fighter, the more aggressive fighter, the clinch fighter. A smaller ring favors the Thai. The JKD fighters' camp protested the ring size. The protest was noted and dismissed. The ring stays at 14 feet. The crowd, 60 to 80 people. Martial artists, mostly. Fighters. Trainers. Students. People who speak the language of combat fluently and who are here to watch a conversation they've been waiting to hear. The tribal arrangement is immediate and visible, the Muay Thai camp on one side of the ring, the JKD and Cali community on the other. The Thai side is bigger, louder, more confident. They're already discussing the after-party. Their man has never lost in America. Their man has elbows that end fights the way gravity ends flight. This is going to be quick. The JKD side is smaller. Quieter. A mix of ethnicities reflecting the cross-cultural DNA of the arts they practice: Filipino, Mexican, Black, White, Chinese, a demographic mosaic that mirrors JKD's philosophical foundation of taking the best from everywhere and excluding nothing on the basis of origin. They're not quiet because they're afraid. They're quiet because they've seen their man train. They know something the Thai camp doesn't know yet. And they know that explaining it would be less effective than demonstrating it. Cigarette smoke in the air. The smell of liniment, the menthol and camphor ointment that fighters rub on their muscles before competing. The smell of sweat, old and new, ground into the canvas and the ropes and the concrete floor. A single overhead light above the ring, casting the fighters in a pool of harsh white illumination while the crowd recedes into shadow. The visual effect is theatrical without trying to be two men in light, surrounded by darkness, about to answer a question that both sides believe has already been answered. The bell rings. Round 1. The two men come to the center of the ring, and the visual contrast is the first thing the crowd processes. 4 inches of height difference. 10 pounds of weight difference. But more than the numbers, 2 completely different physical architectures. The Thai fighter is vertical, tall, his guard held high in the traditional Muay Thai stance, hands framing his face, elbows tucked, weight centered on the balls of his feet but stable, grounded, ready to kick or clinch from a platform that looks immovable. He occupies space the way a building occupies space, solidly, unapologetically, with the structural confidence of a thing that expects to remain where it is. The JKD fighter is different. Lower. His stance is angled, not square to the Thai, but bladed, the lead shoulder forward, the rear shoulder back, presenting a narrower target. His lead hand is extended slightly forward of his face in the JKD ready position, which looks casual to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking at and looks like a loaded spring to anyone who does. His weight is distributed unevenly, slightly more on the rear foot, creating the coiled back posture that allows the lead hand and lead foot to fire without a weight transfer that would telegraph the attack. The Thai opens exactly as his pattern dictates. The teep kick, the front push kick that is Muay Thai's jab, its rangefinder, its space control tool. The ball of the foot drives toward the JKD fighter's midsection with the mechanical precision of a piston. It's fast, it's technically excellent, and it hits air. The JKD fighter has moved. Not backward would concede ground in a 14-foot ring where ground is the most precious commodity. Sideways. An angular exit, a lateral step that takes him off the teep's center line while keeping his own distance to the Thai unchanged. The teep extends into empty space. The Thai's leg hangs in the air for a fraction of a second before retracting. In that fraction of a second, the JKD fighter could have attacked the extended leg, the open body line, the momentary imbalance. He doesn't. He notes the opening. Files it. Continues moving. The Thai's leg kicks come next. Roundhouse kicks to the JKD fighter's lead leg, the standard Muay Thai attrition strategy. Chop the lead leg. Reduce its function. Make the opponent stationary. Then finish upstairs. The kicks are fast and they are powerful and some of them land. They have to. In a 14-foot ring, against a kicker with the Thai's range and speed, complete avoidance is not possible. But the kicks that land don't land clean. The JKD fighter checks some, raising his lead shin to meet the incoming shin, bone on bone, the impact producing a sound like a bat hitting a tree. He absorbs others by turning his leg at the moment of impact, taking the kick on the meaty part of the calf or the outside of the thigh rather than the nerve-dense front of the quadriceps. And the worst ones, the full rotation roundhouses aimed at the sweet spot above the knee, he avoids entirely by not being where they're aimed. Not through speed. Through positioning. He's already moved before the kick launches, his angular footwork carrying him to a position that's 6 inches different from where the Thai expected him to be, and 6 inches, at the speed a Muay Thai roundhouse travels, is the difference between a fight-ending leg kick and a kick that grazes the air where a leg used to be. The JKD fighter's offensive output in round 1 is minimal. Confusingly minimal. He throws almost nothing. A jab here, fast, non-committal, more of a measurement than a strike, snapping out and retracting before the Thai can time a counter. A straight lead there, the signature JKD technique, non-telegraphic, arriving without warning and departing without consequence, touching the Thai's guard or grazing his shoulder but never committing enough force to open a return exchange. The JKD fighter is not fighting. He's something else. Something the Thai's experience doesn't have a category for. The Thai, for his part, interprets what he sees through the only lens he has, his 80-fight frame of reference. What he sees is a man who won't engage. A man moving, dodging, circling, avoiding. In the Thai's library of opponent types, this is a common entry. The scared fighter. The outmatched fighter. The man who knows he's facing something he can't handle and who responds with movement as a substitute for courage. The Thai has seen this many times. These opponents always break in round 2, when the Thai escalates and the movement runs out and the ring shrinks and the elbows find their target. What the Thai doesn't see can't see, because the information is invisible to anyone who isn't looking for it, is that the JKD fighter is reading him. Every teep kick the Thai throws tells the JKD fighter something. The timing between initiation and impact, 1.2 seconds from chamber to extension. The telegraph, a slight drop of the kicking side shoulder, approximately 0.2 of a second before the kick launches, so small that it would be invisible to anyone not specifically trained to identify pre-movement indicators. The recovery, after the teep extends, the Thai's weight settles onto his support leg for approximately 0.3 of a second before the kicking leg returns to its base. A window. Small. Consistent. Catalogued. Every roundhouse reveals more. The Thai's preferred distance for the leg kick, approximately 4.5 feet. His hip rotation, full, committed, the hips turning over completely to generate maximum power. The price of that commitment, a recovery phase where the kicking leg must return across the body's center line before the Thai can throw another technique. Duration of recovery, approximately 0.4 of a second. Another window. Wider than the first. Also catalogued. Every clinch attempt shows the JKD fighter the Thai's entry mechanics. The hands reach for the back of the neck. The preferred hand position, right hand dominant. Pulling the opponent's head down and to the right. The knee follows, right knee to the body, rising on a vertical line from approximately 18 inches below its target. The clinch entry has a tell, the Thai's left foot steps slightly to the outside before the hands engage, repositioning his base for the pull. The tell precedes the clinch by approximately a quarter second. Bruce Lee's principle, alive in this ring, alive in this fighter who never met Bruce but who carries Bruce's DNA in his movement. Every fighter is a book. Read the first chapter. The genre tells you the story. Muay Thai is the genre. This particular Thai fighter is the story. And the JKD fighter, moving quietly around the ring, throwing almost nothing, absorbing the occasional leg kick and checking the occasional roundhouse, this JKD fighter is reading. Not the genre. The story. This man's personal rhythms. This man's personal windows. This man's personal pattern, the pattern that has produced 72 wins in 80 fights, and that is, right now, in this 14-foot ring, being disassembled and catalogued and filed in the JKD fighter's mental library for use in round 2. The round ends. The bell sounds. Both men return to their corners. The Thai's corner, confident. Satisfied. Their man won the round. He landed more. He controlled the ring. He pushed the JKD fighter around with teep kicks and chopped his leg with roundhouses, and the little man barely threw anything. He's scared. He's outmatched. Round 2 will be short. The JKD fighter's corner, quiet. His coach, a senior Inosanto student, says something brief. A few words. The JKD fighter nods. He already knows. He knew before the coach spoke. He knew by the end of the first minute of round 1. The Thai's pattern is complete. The chapter has been read. The windows have been measured. The tells have been identified. The rhythms have been mapped. Everything the JKD fighter needs for round 2 is stored and ready. He sits on his stool and drinks water and looks at nothing, and behind his eyes a system is organizing itself for something the Thai fighter's 80-fight experience has never encountered. Round 2. Where the Thai fighter always wins. The bell rings. The Thai comes out differently. The energy has shifted. The probing, calibrating, patient fighter of round 1 is gone. In his place, the finisher. The man who has ended dozens of fights in the second round with elbows and knees and the relentless forward pressure of a trained killer who has decided that the time for patience has expired. The first 30 seconds of round 2 are an escalation. The leg kicks come harder. The teep kicks are aimed higher, at the chest now, not the hip, the intent shifting from range management to damage. The Thai is closing distance. Not gradually, aggressively. He's cutting the ring, using the 14-foot dimensions that favor him, walking the JKD fighter toward the ropes where movement dies and the clinch becomes inescapable. His elbows start appearing. Short, sharp probes, not the finishing elbows yet, but the setup elbows. The appetizers. Thrown at half speed, half commitment, testing the JKD fighter's reaction to elbows, gauging his comfort level, establishing the elbow as a threat so that the finishing elbow, when it comes, can exploit whatever defensive habit the JKD fighter reveals in response to the setups. The JKD fighter is doing something that the narrator needs to point out, because it's invisible and it's the key to everything that follows. He is letting the Thai build the pattern. He's not disrupting the escalation. He's not changing his own rhythm or increasing his output or doing anything to alter the trajectory of the Thai's round 2 protocol. He's maintaining the same quiet, minimal, reading posture from round 1. Moving. Absorbing. Checking. Not fighting. Why? Because he wants the pattern to complete itself. He wants the Thai to reach the finale of his round 2 sequence. He wants the elbows. The real ones. The finishing ones. He wants the Thai to throw the technique that has ended 72 fights, the technique the Thai trusts more than any other, the technique that represents the culmination of 15 years of training and 80 fights of refinement. He wants it because the technique completing itself is the trap opening. Round 2. Where the Thai fighter always wins. Where 72 opponents have felt the elbows come and felt the lights dim and felt their legs go away and grabbed for ropes that couldn't save them. Round 2, where the pattern says finish him now. But the Thai fighter has never, in 80 fights, faced an opponent who was waiting for round 2. Who wanted round 2. Who had spent all of round 1 reading the pattern so that when the pattern arrived at its climax, the climax wouldn't be a weapon. It would be a door. The moment arrives. The Thai has worked the JKD fighter to the ropes. The ring is behind him, nowhere to go. The Thai steps in. His right foot plants. His hips begin to rotate. His right elbow, the weapon that has ended dozens of fights, begins its arc. The elbow is a thing of terrible beauty. The point of the bone traveling on a horizontal plane toward the JKD fighter's temple, driven by the full rotation of the Thai's torso, carrying the accumulated force of 165 pounds of conditioned fighter muscle rotating around a central axis. The technique is fast. The technique is powerful. The technique is, in the context of Muay Thai, perfect. The technique requires commitment. To throw an elbow with finishing force, the body must rotate fully. The hips must turn over. The shoulder must drive through. And for approximately 0.3 of a second during the elbow's execution, 0.3 of a second, the window the JKD fighter measured in round 1 and has been waiting for ever since, the Thai's left side opens. The guard drops on the opposite side of the elbow. The chin becomes available. The left cheekbone, the jawline, the temple on the non-elbow side, all of it exposed, all of it unguarded, all of it reachable by anyone who was fast enough and positioned correctly and who knows the window is coming because he's read the chapter and he knows how the story goes. The JKD fighter intercepts. Not blocks. Interception is not blocking. Blocking is defensive. You stop the attack from reaching you, but you absorb the initiative, the attacker remains the attacker, the defender remains the defender, and the dynamic continues with the roles unchanged. Interception is something fundamentally different. Interception is Bruce Lee's core contribution to martial arts combat theory, the concept that gives Jeet Kune its name, the way of the intercepting fist. Interception means, you attack the attack. You don't wait for the technique to arrive and then respond. You strike the opponent at the exact moment when they are most committed to their own technique and therefore most vulnerable. You use their commitment against them. You turn their weapon into your opening. The JKD fighter's straight lead enters the 0.3 of a second window. The fist, the lead hand, the right hand, the hand that Kali training has made fast enough to catch sticks out of the air, travels from its position to the Thai's exposed left cheekbone in a time frame that the Thai's nervous system cannot process because the Thai's nervous system is busy. It's busy executing an elbow. It's busy managing the complex motor sequence of hip rotation and shoulder drive and elbow extension and balance maintenance. The Thai's brain does not have spare processing capacity to simultaneously execute a finishing elbow and defend against an attack that it did not expect, that arrives from an angle it wasn't monitoring, at a speed it wasn't calibrated for. The straight lead hits the Thai's left cheekbone at the exact moment the elbow reaches the midpoint of its arc. The timing is not approximate. It is precise. Machined. The JKD fighter has been waiting for this specific technique, at this specific moment, in this specific window, since the first teep kick of round 1. Everything, the reading, the patience, the minimal output, the willingness to lose round 1 on volume, the refusal to disrupt the Thai's pattern, everything was preparation for this. For one straight lead, delivered to a 0.3 of a second window, intercepting the technique that has ended 72 fights. The Thai's elbow continues past the JKD fighter's head. It was aimed at a head that is no longer there. The JKD fighter's angular positioning, maintained throughout the fight, has kept him slightly outside the Thai's center line, and the straight lead was delivered with a simultaneous lateral shift that moved his head 3 inches to the left. The elbow passes through the space where the head was supposed to be. The straight lead arrives at the space where the guard was supposed to be. The Thai's own attack became the opening. The pattern that has won 72 fights has, for the first time, been turned against its owner. The combination that follows lasts approximately 3 seconds. Not 30 seconds, like the sparring session between Bruce and Dan. Not 8 seconds, like the wrestler. 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, 3 different martial arts systems converge into a single continuous flow of technique that the Thai's defensive system, calibrated for Muay Thai opponents who attack in 4-4 time on predictable planes, cannot process. The straight lead was the key that turned the lock. The Thai's head snaps to the right from the impact. His balance shifts. His guard, which was open for the elbow, is now open and disoriented. His brain is processing the input: I've been hit, the elbow missed, something is wrong, but the processing takes time, and time is the one thing the JKD fighter will not give him. A right cross. Boxing. The rear hand, thrown with full hip rotation, targeting the same left side that the straight lead just stunned. The cross follows the straight lead with almost zero gap. The straight lead retracts and the cross launches in a single continuous motion, the way a sentence continues after a comma. The cross is heavier than the straight lead. More force. The weight transfer from rear foot to lead foot drives the knuckles into the Thai's jaw with an impact that the Thai feels not as pain but as electrical interference, the brain receiving a signal so intense that it drowns out all other signals for a fraction of a second. An elbow. Filipino martial arts. The JKD fighter's own elbow, but thrown from an angle that the Thai has never encountered: a Kali angle, a diagonal rising line that enters from below the Thai's visual field and strikes the underside of the jaw. This is not a Muay Thai elbow. Muay Thai elbows travel horizontally or downward. This elbow travels upward, on a diagonal, from a direction the Thai's defensive training has not prepared him for. The impact lifts the Thai's head. His eyes go briefly white. A second straight lead. JKD again. But thrown from a different position than the first, the JKD fighter has shifted during the combination, moved laterally, changed his angle, so that this straight lead arrives from a line the Thai's scrambled defensive system isn't monitoring. Non-telegraphic. No wind-up. The fist simply appears at the center of the Thai's face with the inevitability of a mathematical proof reaching its conclusion. 3 seconds. 4 techniques. 3 different martial arts systems. Boxing, Filipino martial arts, JKD blended into a single continuous combination that flows from one system to the next without seams, without stylistic boundaries, without the transitional gaps that would give the Thai's pattern recognition system time to identify what's happening in mounted defense. The combination is not one style. It's not 3 styles in sequence. It's one thing, a single integrated expression of the principle that no single style is complete and that the fighter who draws from all sources and is limited by none will always have an answer that the specialist hasn't prepared for. The Thai fighter's legs give out. Not a knockout, not the dramatic, cinematic collapse of a man switched off by a single blow. A system's failure. The accumulation of 4 impacts, arriving faster than his brain can process them, from angles his 15 years of training haven't prepared him for, at a rhythm his internal metronome cannot track, produces a cascade of neural confusion that the body resolves the only way it can, by shutting down the systems it can afford to lose. Legs first. Balance second. The ability to remain vertical, which the human body maintains through a constant, unconscious collaboration between the inner ear, the visual system, and the proprioceptive network in the muscles and joints, that collaboration breaks down. The signals conflict. The brain receives contradictory data about where the body is in space and resolves the contradiction by defaulting to gravity. The Thai grabs the ropes. Not a conscious decision. The hands reach for the ropes the way a drowning man reaches for a floating object, reflexively, desperately, the body's last resort attempt to maintain vertical orientation using an external support structure when the internal one has failed. His legs are under him but they're not working. His eyes are open but they're not tracking. His guard is down because the concept of a guard requires a functioning assessment of threat direction and his threat assessment system is offline. The referee steps in. He's seen enough. The body language of the Thai fighter, the rope grab, the unfocused eyes, the legs that are present but not participating, tells the referee everything the rules require him to know. This fighter cannot intelligently defend himself. The fight is over. Round 2. Where the Thai fighter always wins. Where 72 opponents have felt the pattern close around them like a trap and have felt the elbows arrive and have felt the world go sideways. Round 2, where Bruce Lee's principle of interception turned the Thai fighter's own pattern into his defeat. The technique that had ended 72 fights ended this one too. The elbow. Just not the way the Thai expected. Not his elbow. The elbow thrown in response to his elbow. The interception. The principle that says, your attack is my opening. Your commitment is my advantage. Your pattern is my map. The gym goes quiet. Not the odd silence of the television audience watching Bruce on a studio stage. Not the processing silence of the stuntman witnessing 1.5 seconds of unguarded face. A different silence. A confused silence. The silence of 60 to 80 martial artists who just watched something they don't have a framework to categorize. The Muay Thai camp is not angry. Anger would be simpler. Anger would be the response to a lucky punch, a bad stoppage, a referee's error. Anger has a target. What the Muay Thai camp is experiencing doesn't have a target because it doesn't have a shape. Their champion, 14-0 on American soil, 72 wins in 80 fights, the man whose elbows had ended more careers than they could count, is standing against the ropes with his legs functioning again but his understanding not yet back online, stopped by a man 4 inches shorter and 10 pounds lighter using a style they had, 1 hour ago, called toy martial arts. Toy. The word hangs in the cigarette smoke like something that used to mean one thing and now means another. The JKD camp's reaction is not what you might expect. No cheering. No eruption. Quiet satisfaction. The particular stillness of people who knew something and have just watched the knowing confirmed. A few nods. A few quiet conversations. A hand on the JKD fighter's shoulder when he comes back to his corner. That's it. No gloating. Gloating would violate the principle that says you don't disrespect what your opponent has built, you only demonstrate that your approach addresses what their approach does not. The Thai's Muay Thai is real. The Thai's Muay Thai is excellent. The Thai lost not because his art is bad but because his art is incomplete, and completeness is the only metric that matters when two different systems collide. The Thai fighter recovers. His legs come back over the next minute. His eyes refocus. The neural cascade resolves itself the way neural cascades do, gradually, in stages, each system coming back online in order of priority. Motor function first. Balance second. Spatial awareness third. Full cognitive function last. By the time full cognition returns, the Thai is standing unsupported in his corner, looking across the ring at the JKD fighter, and the expression on his face is the expression that has lived at the center of every story on this channel. The gap. The distance between what he expected and what he found. The distance between toy kung fu and whatever just happened to him. The distance between 80 fights of experience that told him he knew what fighting looked like and 3 seconds that told him he didn't. The same expression the bodyguard wore. The same expression the wrestler wore. The same expression that 70 million television viewers wore when Bruce Lee moved 3 frames faster than their eyes could track. The universal human face of a person standing in the gap between their model of reality and reality itself, deciding what to do next. What the Thai fighter does next is the most important moment in this story. More important than the interception. More important than the 3-second combination. More important than the referee's stoppage. He does something that requires more courage than any of the 80 fights he's had, more courage than any elbow he's ever thrown, more courage than walking into a ring in a foreign country against a foreign style with his camp's reputation on his shoulders. He walks to the JKD fighter's corner. He walks across the ring on legs that were non-functional 2 minutes ago, past the referee who steps aside, past the ropes that were holding him up 30 seconds ago, to the corner where the JKD fighter is standing with his coach, drinking water, calm, the adrenaline still in his system but the discipline already reasserting itself. The Thai fighter speaks. Through a translator, or in limited English, the accounts vary, the language barrier is real but the communication is not impeded by it because the communication is happening at a level below language. He asks 2 questions. First, what style? Jeet Kune do. Bruce Lee's art. The Thai pauses. He knows the name. Everyone in the martial arts world knows the name. But the Thai knows Bruce Lee as a movie star. An entertainer. The man from the posters, the man from the films, the man who kicked people in choreographed sequences that looked spectacular and that the Thai had filed, along with everything else he knew about Kung Fu, under theater. Not a source of techniques that can stop an 80-fight Muay Thai veteran in the second round of a fight the Muay Thai veteran was supposed to win. He processes this. The processing takes a few seconds. The name Bruce Lee undergoes a recategorization in his mind, moving from the entertainment shelf to the combat shelf, from theater to threat, from toy to real. Then the second question, can I learn this? 4 words. 4 words that contain more martial arts philosophy than most textbooks. 4 words that demonstrate, in the space of a single sentence, the quality that Bruce Lee considered the highest virtue a martial artist could possess, higher than speed, higher than power, higher than technique, higher than any physical attribute. Adaptability. The willingness to look at evidence that contradicts your beliefs and to change your beliefs rather than deny the evidence. The Thai fighter's question is the most important moment in this story because the interception proved that JKD works. The 3-second combination proved that the integration of multiple systems produces something that a single system cannot answer. The referee's stoppage proved that the proof was decisive enough to end a fight. But the question proved something bigger than any of that. The question proved that the principle spreads. That a man trained in one system, deeply trained, 80 fights trained, confronted with evidence that another system contains something his does not, can choose to integrate rather than reject. Can choose curiosity over pride. Can choose learning over defending. Bruce Lee called this using no way as way. He wrote it in his notebooks. He repeated it in interviews. He built his entire philosophy around the idea that the moment you commit to a single way, a single system, a single approach, a single set of techniques that you defend as complete and sufficient, you've lost. You've lost not because your way is bad but because your way is limited, and limitation is the only real opponent. The Thai fighter, standing in that ring with his legs barely under him and his pride reorganizing itself around new information, became, in that moment, a Jeet Kune Do practitioner without knowing it. Not because he learned JKD techniques. Not because he adopted Bruce Lee's stance or threw a straight lead or practiced broken rhythm. Because he asked the question. Because he stood in the gap between what he knew and what he just experienced and chose to step forward into the gap rather than retreat to the safety of what he knew. That choice, the choice to learn rather than defend, is the essence of everything Bruce Lee taught. And the Thai fighter made it instinctively, without having read a word Bruce ever wrote. The JKD fighter extends his hand. The Thai takes it. They touch gloves. The physical contact means something specific in the martial arts community, it means respect. Not given freely, not assumed, not demanded. Earned. The Thai earned the JKD fighter's respect by being genuinely dangerous. The JKD fighter earned the Thai's respect by being genuinely better. And both men earned something from each other that transcends the fight itself, the acknowledgement that the other is a real martial artist, and that the exchange between them, violent as it was also a form of education. The crowd, which has been silent since the stoppage, begins to move. The tribal lines blur slightly. A few people from the Muay Thai side drift toward the center. A few people from the JKD side do the same. The conversations that start are quiet, technical, curious. What was that technique? The one that came in under the elbow? How did he know the elbow was coming? Did you see the angle? The conversations are the sound of walls becoming doors. Not collapsing. Opening. The Thai fighter returned to Thailand. Not immediately, he stayed in America for a while, training with the JKD community, sitting in on classes at Inosanto's academy, absorbing what he could through the combination of physical practice and the nonverbal transmission that martial arts facilitates between practitioners who don't share a common spoken language but who share the common physical language of combat. What he took home was not JKD techniques. He didn't adopt the straight lead. He didn't change his stance. He didn't start calling himself a JKD practitioner or hanging a Bruce Lee poster in his gym. What he took home was JKD principles. The concept of interception, meeting the attack with an attack, exploiting the opponent's commitment. The concept of broken rhythm, disrupting the timing that the opponent expects, attacking between the beats. The concept that no single style is complete, which is the hardest concept for any traditional martial artist to accept because it requires admitting that the system you've devoted your life to has gaps. And the concept of reading, patient, systematic, first-round reading of the opponent's personal patterns, rhythms, tells, and windows. Not the style. The individual. He incorporated these ideas into his Muay Thai. Not replacing the art. Enriching it. Adding tools that the system didn't have. Timing disruptions that his opponents hadn't seen. Entry angles borrowed from Filipino martial arts. A patience in the first round that he hadn't previously practiced, a willingness to lose the first round on volume in order to win the fight on information. Meanwhile, across America and beyond, other fights like this one were happening. Not one. Dozens. Hundreds. The underground circuit produced a steady stream of cross-style matches throughout the late 70s and 80s. JKD practitioners fought Muay Thai fighters. Karate fighters sparred wrestlers. Boxers fought judoka. Taekwondo champions faced grapplers. Each fight was a small experiment, conducted in a gym or a basement or a parking lot, with no cameras and no records, testing the same hypothesis: does your style actually work against a style it wasn't designed to face? The results, accumulated over a decade of these experiments, were consistent. No single style was complete. Every system had gaps. Muay Thai was devastating in the striking range and the clinch but vulnerable to takedowns. Boxing was extraordinary in the hand range but limited below the waist. Wrestling was dominant on the ground but vulnerable to strikes during the entry. Judo was powerful in the clinch but dependent on the GI. Karate was effective at long range but lost its coherence at close quarters. Every system was a chapter, not a book. And the fighters who won consistently across the underground circuit were not the ones with the best single chapter. They were the ones who could read multiple chapters. Who could operate across the boundaries between ranges, between systems, between the zones where one art ended and another began. This was Bruce Lee's central thesis. Written in his notebooks in the 1960s. Demonstrated in his garage, in the sparring sessions with Dan Inosanto, in the 30 seconds that produced 72 hours of recovery and 50 years of teaching. The idea that no single style is complete, that the intelligent fighter takes what is useful from every system, discards what is useless, and adds what is uniquely his own, was considered radical when Bruce proposed it. Traditional martial arts communities called it disrespectful. Purists called it dilution. Establishment figures called it exactly what the Muay Thai champion had called it before the fight: toy martial arts. Playing. Not real. The underground matches proved it was real. One fight at a time. One small experiment at a time. In gyms with no cameras and rings with no judges and crowds of 50 to 80 people who went home and told their training partners what they'd seen, and whose training partners adjusted their own training in response, and whose adjustments rippled outward through the martial arts community like waves from a stone dropped in water. November 12, 1993. Denver, Colorado. The first Ultimate Fighting Championship. A tournament designed to answer, on a national stage with pay-per-view cameras and professional commentary, the question that the underground circuit had been answering in the dark for 15 years: which martial art is the best? Fighters from different disciplines, boxing, karate, sumo, savate, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, competed under minimal rules in an octagonal cage. No weight classes. No time limits. No gloves in the early events. The rawest possible test of style against style. The commentators struggled to categorize what they saw. The fights didn't look like any single martial art. They were messy, chaotic, unpredictable. A boxer who dominated in the stand-up range was taken down and submitted on the ground. A wrestler who controlled his opponent for 5 minutes was knocked out with an upkick he didn't see coming. A karate champion who threw beautiful techniques from the outside was clinched against the cage and neutralized at a range where his kicks couldn't function. Within a decade, the UFC and the global competition it spawned would produce a new type of fighter. Not a boxer. Not a wrestler. Not a Thai boxer or a karate champion or a judoka. A mixed martial artist. A fighter who trained in multiple systems, who integrated the best of each, who could strike at distance and clinch in the middle and grapple on the ground and transition between ranges without losing effectiveness. A fighter who operated without stylistic boundaries because stylistic boundaries had been proven, conclusively and repeatedly, to be the biggest vulnerability a fighter could have. The commentators in 1993 thought they were watching the birth of something new. They were watching the mainstreaming of something old. The principle had been articulated 30 years earlier by a man who weighed 135 pounds, who stood 5'7", who had been dismissed by Hollywood as too Chinese and by traditional martial artists as too modern and by the entertainment industry as too foreign and by critics as too theoretical. The principle had been passed from that man to Dan Inosanto in a training space, through hundreds of sessions and one 30-second exchange that left Dan unable to walk for 3 days. The principle had been passed from Dan to his students, including the compact Filipino-American who carried it into a 14-foot ring against a man with 72 wins. The principle had been transmitted, that very night, to a Thai fighter who stood in the gap between his expectation and his experience and asked 4 words: "Can I learn this?" Bruce Lee predicted MMA 30 years before it existed. Not because he was psychic. Not because he was a visionary in the mystical sense that the word is usually applied to him. Because he was logical. Because he observed. Because he asked a simple question: what happens when a fighter trained in one system meets a fighter trained in a different system? And followed the answer to its logical conclusion. If you take the best of every system and discard the rest, you get something that beats any single system. He proved it in his garage. His students proved it in the ring. And eventually, the whole world proved it in the octagon. The Muay Thai camp sent a second fighter 3 months later. This one was bigger, meaner, and had watched the tape of the first fight 40 times. He'd studied the interception. He'd studied the angles. He'd studied the broken rhythm. He wasn't going to make the same mistake. What happened in that second fight and what it revealed about the limits of Bruce Lee's system, about what happens when the opposition adapts, when the pattern you've been reading starts reading you back, that's a different story. For a different time. This story ends in Bangkok. 20 years after the fight. In a gym with no air conditioning, where the heat sits on the body the way Hong Kong heat sat on the body in a story I told earlier about a stuntman and a film set in 1.5 seconds of truth. A gym with a ring held together with rope and memory. A gym where a Thai fighter, older now, his shins still conditioned, his elbows still sharp, his record still carrying the 72 wins and the 9 losses, the 9th being the one that changed everything. A gym where this Thai fighter is teaching. He's teaching young fighters. Teenagers, mostly. Kids with hungry eyes and thin bodies and the willingness to be hit that is the admission price to Thai boxing. He teaches them Muay Thai. The teep kick. The roundhouse. The clinch. The elbows. Everything he learned in 80 fights across 2 countries over a career that spans decades. But he also teaches them something else. Something that doesn't have a Thai name. Something he learned in a 14-foot ring in Los Angeles from a man 4 inches shorter than him who'd never been to Thailand and who'd never met Bruce Lee. He teaches them to read. To spend the first round watching, not fighting. To map the opponent's rhythm before trying to disrupt it. He teaches them timing disruptions, attacks that arrive between the beats, that fall outside the opponent's expected tempo. He teaches them that the moment you believe your style is complete is the moment your style begins to fail, because completeness is an illusion and every system has a gap, and the fighter who can't see his own gaps will have them revealed by someone who can. He never calls it JKD. He never uses Bruce Lee's vocabulary. He never mentions the fight to his students, not the loss, not the interception, not the 4 words he spoke afterward. But the principles are there, embedded in his teaching, transmitted from his body to his students' bodies the same way they were transmitted from Bruce to Dan and from Dan to the JKD fighter and from the JKD fighter's fists to the Thai's nervous system on a night in Los Angeles when everything changed. The lesson has traveled from a training space in Los Angeles in the 1960s. Through a 30-second sparring session that produced 3 days of bruises and a lifetime of teaching. Through a compact Filipino-American with fast hands and strange timing. Through a 14-foot ring and a 3-second combination and a referee's stoppage. Through 4 words spoken by a man whose legs were barely under him. Through 20 years of training and teaching and passing forward. To a gym in Bangkok where teenagers with hungry eyes are learning to fight in a way that their grandparents' generation wouldn't recognize. Where the rhythms are a little different. Where the timing is a little stranger. Where the reading is a little deeper. Where the ghost of a man who weighed 135 pounds and died at 32 moves through the combinations like a current through water, invisible. Present, undeniable. Bruce Lee was nowhere near that ring in Los Angeles. Bruce Lee had been dead for years when the JKD fighter intercepted the Thai's elbow and ended the fight in 3 seconds. Bruce Lee never visited Thailand, never trained in a Bangkok gym, never met the teenagers who are learning, right now, to attack between the beats. And Bruce Lee was everywhere. In every interception. Every broken rhythm. Every angle that came from somewhere the opponent hadn't been trained to look. Bruce was the ghost in the machine. The principle inside the technique. The idea that survived the man and kept moving, from body to body, from ring to ring, from continent to continent, from generation to generation, until the whole world caught up and gave it a name, mixed martial arts, and acted as if it had just been invented, when in fact it had been written in a notebook 30 years earlier by a man who simply looked at fighting honestly and wrote down what he saw. He called it Jeet Kune Do. The way of the intercepting fist. But the fist was never the point. The interception was the point. The willingness to meet whatever comes, from wherever it comes, and answer it with whatever works. No loyalty to a single system. No limitation imposed by tradition or habit or pride. Just the question, does this work? And if it does, use it. And if it doesn't, let it go. And if you don't know, step into the ring and find out. That was the point. And on a night in Los Angeles, in a 14-foot ring, under a single overhead light, surrounded by cigarette smoke and tribal loyalty and the smell of liniment and sweat and the quiet murmur of 80 people who came to watch a question get answered, that point was proven. Not by Bruce Lee. By his ghost. By the principle that outlived the man. By the idea that traveled from teacher to student to opponent and kept traveling, keeps traveling, will keep traveling for as long as people fight and wonder whether there's a better way to do it. The ghost hasn't stopped fighting. I don't think it ever will. And on a 10-point scale, I'd give this one an 8. The fight choreography is the strongest in this series. The round-by-round progression from reading to interception to combination is paced like an actual fight, with the tension building through round 1's apparent passivity and detonating in round 2's 3-second climax. The musical analogy 4/4 time versus jazz is the single best metaphor in the series for explaining broken rhythm to a non-martial arts audience. The Thai fighter is treated with genuine respect, and his post-fight question elevates the story from a victory narrative to a transmission narrative, which is the right thematic register for a video that's ultimately about legacy rather than competition. The MMA connection is handled with appropriate restraint, present but not oversold, the through line drawn without the narrator needing to underline it. What costs it points, the venue description in Act 2, while atmospherically effective, runs slightly long for its narrative function. The Round 1 description, which is necessarily less action-dense than Round 2 because the JKD fighter is reading rather than fighting, risks losing momentum despite the narrator's efforts to explain why the passivity is strategic. And the Bangkok Coda, while thematically beautiful, covers ground that the MMA section has already established. The principle spreads, the lesson travels. The double ending dilutes slightly. 8 is the honest number for a script that lands its central sequence, the interception, with devastating precision and earns its thesis through narrative rather than argument.